Hey, do you believe a lazy, chubby cat can become a real hero? Tonight, you'll hear one of the most magical and brave stories ever. About an orange cat and a little mouse, and a very scary night. Don't go anywhere, this story might make your heart feel warm. Before we start, maybe you should click like or subscribe? I mean, if a chubby lazy cat can become a hero, the least you can do is press a tiny button, right? Okay. Good. Now let's start the story of Pilo and Mimi. It's actually pretty amazing. Hi, my name is Lily. Tonight, I want to tell you a very special story before you go to sleep. It's about a chubby orange cat named Pilo. He's super fluffy and has the prettiest blue eyes. And his best friend is a tiny white mouse named Mimi. She's really small and cute like a tiny snowball. They live together in an old alley, and even though everything around them looks scary and dark, they always share food and stay close, because they love each other like real family. But one night, something scary comes, and Pilo has to be very brave, even though he's a little lazy and loves to sleep all day. This story is about friendship, courage, and how even a sleepy fat cat can become a hero when someone he loves is in danger. Now, close your eyes, or just listen carefully. Because this is the story of Pilo and Mimi, the courage in the middle of the night. The clock had just struck midnight in a very welcoming alley, if by welcoming you mean damp, slightly smelly, and possibly a 5-star hotel for dumpster raccoons. The rain drizzled lazily, dripping off rusty pipes like they were all collectively sighing about life. In this romantic, totally Pinterest-worthy setting, sat a cat. But not just any cat. Oh no, meet Pilo. Pilo was orange. Bright orange. Like a fluffy traffic cone with whiskers. He was round, fabulously round, with soft chubby cheeks that jiggled every time he turned his head too quickly, which, fortunately, wasn't often because Pilo believed strongly in the philosophy of move only when absolutely necessary. He had big blue eyes that looked way too innocent for someone who once stole a sausage straight from a sleeping butcher. And yes, he was adorable, the kind of adorable that made humans go, ah, while simultaneously thinking that cat definitely ate someone's lunch. Tonight, Pilo was sitting comfortably under a slightly crooked tin roof beside an old noodle stall, enjoying what every respectable alley cat would call a feast, a half-eaten fish bone, a stale piece of bread, and something that might have once been cheese or a piece of soap. He wasn't sure and honestly didn't care. Across from him, sheltered under an upside-down plastic bucket, because luxury comes in many forms, sat Mimi, a tiny white mouse with beady eyes and a brave heart the size of a peanut. Now, in normal nature documentaries, cats eat mice. That's the whole plot. But Pilo and Mimi must have missed that memo. Maybe Pilo was too lazy to chase her, maybe Mimi just had a great personality, who knows, but somehow, these two had become friends. Real friends. The kind who shared food and rolled their eyes at the same weird pigeons. Mimi would often nibble crumbs and look up at Pilo like a tiny life coach. Pilo, in return, sometimes pushed a bigger piece of food toward her, which for him was basically a grand gesture of love. The rain kept falling softly, and the alley lights flickered like they were powered by a potato. Pilo let out a long sigh, the dramatic type, as if to say, ah yes, another peaceful night in this glamorous neighborhood. His fur was slightly damp at the edges, but he was too comfortable to move. Mimi peeked her little head out and squeaked happily. She looked at Pilo with admiration, probably thinking he was some sort of majestic guardian, unaware that Pilo once got scared by a rolling soda can. He glanced at her as she cheerfully nibbled on a crumb. Eat up, Pilo muttered in his head with a smirk, we might both die tomorrow, but at least we'll die full. There was a sort of unspoken understanding between them, a quiet companionship that made even a dirty alley feel like a warm, cozy living room. Of course, a living room where the Wi-Fi never works, but still, cozy. Pilo stretched, which looked more like a squishy orange balloon trying to do yoga. His tail flicked lazily and he watched as the raindrops turned into tiny silver beads on the ground. He liked nights like this, slow, uneventful, and full of snacks. Life didn't need to be exciting. Life just needed to be comfy. Mimi squeaked again, her tiny whiskers twitching. She waddled over to sit beside him, curling up right next to his giant fluffy belly like it was the world's softest couch. Pilo didn't move. He pretended not to care. But secretly, his heart felt warm, not that he'd ever admit that. If someone asked, he'd say, "She's just using me for body heat," like the emotionally unavailable feline he was. But deep down, Pilo knew they had a bond. One forged not by nature's rules, but by shared leftovers and mutual laziness. Some might call it strange. Others might call it unsanitary. But to them, it was friendship. Real, slightly disgusting, but true friendship. As the wind blew softly and the night grew even quieter, Pilo closed his eyes halfway. He heard the distant barking of a stray dog somewhere far off, and he thought, glad that guy's not here. Everything felt safe. For now. Mimi leaned against him, tiny and trusting. Pilo glanced down once more, almost protectively. And although he'd never say it out loud, he promised himself, if anything ever tried to hurt her, he might actually stand up. Maybe even more than 5 seconds. Which, for Pilo, would be an act of heroism worthy of legend. Little did he know, that promise would be tested sooner than he thought. The night had been suspiciously peaceful, which in this alley usually meant something terrible was about to destroy everyone's mood. Pilo was halfway between sleep and a coma, dreaming of a giant fried chicken leg that lovingly rolled toward him like destiny, when suddenly, his ear twitched. Not both ears, just one, because he was lazy even in crisis mode. There it was again, a sound. Slow, heavy footsteps. Not the tiny scratchy tap of a mouse. Not the fluttery wing flap of a pigeon with self-esteem issues. This sounded big. Like, I pay rent in fear, big. Pilo opened one eye. Mimi stirred beside him, still half asleep, making a small squeak that sounded way too innocent for what was about to happen. Pilo's fur bristled ever so slightly as instinct kicked in, the same instinct that usually just told him when it was dinner time. But this felt different. From the far end of the alley, hidden in the shadows, came a slow growl, low and guttural, the kind of sound that let everyone know this creature had zero sense of humor. A figure lingered near the dumpster, tall and menacing. Was it a dog? A fox? A demon that had absolutely no respect for fat cats trying to mind their business? Probably all of the above. Mimi finally woke up and looked toward the noise. Her little paws trembled. She tried to stay calm, but come on, she was a mouse the size of a cotton ball. Pilo felt her press closer to his side. His brain was screaming, run. But his heart muttered, ugh. Responsibility. The silhouette moved closer, slow and deliberate, like a horror movie villain who enjoys taking their sweet time because apparently suspense is entertaining. Pilo stared at it, ears pinned back, trying to decide if he should hiss, attack, or just fake death and hope the predator wasn't into eating fluffy corpses. Mimi whispered a tiny squeak that sounded like Pilo, or maybe she was praying. At this point, who knew? Pilo gently nudged her behind an old bucket, his blue eyes now open wide and alert. He didn't move his body much, let's not get crazy, but his mind was sharpening like a discount ninja. The creature stepped into the faint alley light. It was a large stray dog, mangy, teeth bared, eyes hungry in that, I haven't had dinner and you look like a snack, kind of way. The dog sniffed the air and locked its gaze onto Mimi first. Of course. Tiny, easy, appetizer. Pilo felt a wave of anger rise in his fluffy chest. Oh no, he thought bitterly, not the tiny therapist I call a friend. The dog growled louder, licking its lips like it was about to audition for a villain role on Animal Planet. Pilo stood up, yes, actually stood. All four paws. It was basically a miracle. His round body lifted like a majestic orange loaf ready to either fight or give a motivational speech. Mimi crouched behind him, shaking. The dog took a step forward. Pilo let out a deep, rumbling sound, half hiss, half demonic coffee machine. It wasn't elegant, but it got the point across. The dog paused for a second, confused. This fat orange thing with the cute face was actually threatening? How dare! Pilo's tail puffed up like a bottle brush, and even though he looked more ridiculous than intimidating, there was a fire in his eyes that said, touch my friend and I swear I will go full Kung Fu Panda on you. The rain intensified, thunder rolling in the distance like dramatic background music someone ordered for free. The dog crouched, ready to lunge. Mimi squeaked in terror. Pilo felt his heartbeat racing like a drum. He knew he wasn't as strong. He knew this was dangerous. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because even though Pilo loved comfort, naps, and food more than anything, he somehow loved that tiny mouse just a little bit more. And if protecting her meant getting scratched, bitten, or possibly having to run, the worst, then so be it. He stepped forward, blocking Mimi completely. Stay behind me, he seemed to say with a growl. She stared at him with wide, watery eyes, part admiration, part absolute panic. Then the dog snarled, taking a step closer. The showdown was coming. Pilo dug his claws into the ground, rain soaking his fur. He was terrified, sure, but also strangely ready. Ready to defend. Ready to fight. Ready to show that courage doesn't always come in the form of six-pack abs and heroic theme music. Sometimes courage looks like a fat orange cat with blue eyes who simply refuses to let his friend become someone's midnight snack. And in that terrifying, tension-filled moment, just before claws would clash and fate would decide whether friendship or fear would win, Pilo whispered something in his head. I swear, if I survive this, I better get a whole chicken tomorrow. Let's be honest, Pilo was not built for heroism. He was built for cuddles, comfort, and maybe a light jog toward a fish can if someone opened one near him. Yet there he was, standing between a hungry dog and a trembling little mouse, already regretting every life choice that led him here. For a brief second, he actually considered running. His brain whispered, hey, we could still bounce. Just grab Mimi and flee like a dramatic soap opera exit. But then he imagined Mimi getting caught mid-run, and suddenly the idea of fleeing lost its appeal. Not because he suddenly turned into Captain America, but because the guilt would probably haunt him forever, and guilt is heavy, even heavier than he was. A raindrop slid down his whiskers as the dog growled again. Pilo's whole body trembled, not entirely out of fear, partially because he was cold and clearly not designed for cold weather unless wrapped in a blanket burrito. He could feel his heartbeat pounding like a drum solo played by a caffeinated toddler. Inside his mind, two voices argued like a married couple on laundry day. Voice 1, coward mode, are you nuts? That dog is bigger than your entire self-esteem. We're gonna die. You hate cardio, you hate pain, you hate drama. Back away slowly, dude. Voice 2, tiny brave mode, Mimi trusts you. If you run now, she's done for. You don't want to wake up tomorrow alone in this alley without her squeaking in your ears about crumbs, do you? Voice 1 screamed, we could just adopt another mouse. Voice 2 slapped Voice 1 emotionally and shouted, it's not about the mouse. It's about loyalty. This is your friend. She made your miserable alley life less miserable. Pilo blinked slowly, as droplets soaked his orange fur. He remembered all those tiny moments with Mimi, when she shared a crumb of cookie with him, when she stayed beside him while he had a cold, or was just lazy for 2 days straight, when she squeaked jokes that weren't funny but somehow made life feel lighter. That little white mouse wasn't just a friend. She was family. Ugh, Pilo sighed internally. Great. I guess I'm emotionally invested now. The dog snarled again, saliva dripping from its fangs like it was doing a villain cosplay. Mimi peeked with terrified eyes from behind Pilo's tail. She trusted him. Completely. Which honestly made this 10 times worse. Pilo pressed his paws against the wet ground and felt a strange surge of bravery bubbling inside him. It wasn't epic. It wasn't loud. It was more like a tired old engine deciding, fine, I'll start. But it was real. He glared at the dog, ears flattened, fur puffed. In that moment, he didn't look like a lazy chubby cat. He looked like a guardian. A fluffy, chunky, slightly ridiculous guardian, but a guardian nonetheless. His mind screamed one more time, we are going to die. But his heart overpowered it with a quieter but stronger voice, not today. Not her. He took one tiny step forward. Just one. But it felt monumental. Mimi gasped softly behind him. The predator dog's eyes narrowed, surprised that this orange loaf of carbs dared to defy it. Lightning flashed somewhere in the sky, because apparently the universe loved dramatic timing. Pilo thought, okay. I'll do this. I will fight. And if I go down, well, at least make it look cool. He inhaled deeply. His claws flexed. Every muscle in his plump body tensed like a marshmallow about to explode. And with that one determined breath, he made the decision. He would protect her. Even if it scared the fur off him. Even if it hurt. Because bravery, apparently, doesn't always come wrapped in muscles and roars. Sometimes it waddles forward, full of fear, full of sarcasm, full of fat, and still refuses to back down. And that was the moment the real battle began. If someone had taken a photo of Pilo in that moment, it would have been the perfect meme captioned, when you're scared to death but still gotta act tough. His fur was standing up, eyes blazing, and his paws dug into the wet ground like a warrior, a very round, highly reluctant warrior. The stray dog in front of him let out another growl, louder this time, a sound meant to intimidate. It probably worked on 99% of alley residents. Too bad tonight it ran into a chunky, orange 1% with abandonment issues and a strong moral code. Pilo felt every instinct inside him screaming to turn around and bolt, but he didn't. Instead, he did something absolutely unthinkable for a cat who normally used violence only against string toys. He charged. Yes, he ran forward. To be clear, it was not a graceful sprint. It was more like a determined wobble powered by adrenaline and sheer indignation. But it was enough to catch the dog off guard. Pilo leaped up with a surprisingly loud hisssss, which honestly sounded like someone stepped on a squeaky toy dipped in rage. His claws connected with the dog's muzzle in a quick swipe. The dog yelped in surprise, apparently not expecting Garfield Jr. to go full assassin mode. Pilo landed back on the ground, tail fluffed up like he'd stuck a fork into an electrical socket. The dog snarled again and lunged. Mimi screamed, tiny paws over her mouth, but Pilo stood firm. The dog's teeth snapped just inches from Pilo's face, but he ducked and let out another furious hiss. His heart was beating like a drum solo on caffeine, but he kept swinging those claws like a fuzzy windmill of anger. 1 strike. 2 strikes. A growl. A hiss. Thunder cracked overhead like nature itself was cheering for the fat cat. At one point, the dog tried to clamp its jaws around Pilo, but our orange warrior twisted just in time and bit the dog on the ear. Yes, he bit him. Pilo himself was shocked. He never expected to actually taste dog ear tonight, yet here he was, living his worst life choices. The dog backed off for a moment, shaking its head in pain and disbelief. Pilo stood there panting, soaked, trembling, but still upright. His eyes locked onto the dog with a fiery mix of fear and murderous friendship loyalty. Back off, his growl seemed to say. Touch her again and I'll turn you into a chew toy. The dog stepped forward again, but this time with hesitation. Pilo hissed once more, louder, showing his teeth like some kind of chubby demon cat. Mimi, still hiding under the bucket, watched in awe, her little eyes round and filled with wonder. To her, Pilo looked 10 feet tall. The dog made one last attempt, lunging forward in frustration. Pilo screamed a fierce yowl and launched himself upward, claws outstretched. He clung onto the dog's face for a second like a furry facehugger from an alien movie, scratched the living daylight out of him, and let out the loudest, angriest hiss he had ever produced in his entire pampered alley life. The dog barked in pain, stumbling backward, confused, bleeding slightly, and honestly over this nonsense. He shook his head violently, and Pilo finally jumped off, landing with a dramatic squish on the wet ground. A moment of silence. The dog glared at Pilo. Pilo glared back. Lightning flashed. Rain poured. The dramatic tension was Oscar-worthy. And then, the dog decided it wasn't worth it. With a final growl, it turned around and slowly retreated back into the darkness of the alley, its ego badly bruised, its face lightly shredded, and its dinner plans ruined by a fat orange menace with a hero complex. Pilo stood there, chest heaving, drenched and exhausted, but victorious. He didn't chase the dog, because honestly, one heroic charge per night was more than enough cardio for the month. He turned around slowly. Mimi peeked out from her hiding spot, her eyes teary with relief. She squeaked softly, awed and grateful. Pilo walked toward her on shaky legs, looking like a wet Cheeto in emotional recovery. Mimi ran to him and wrapped her tiny arms around his paw in the smallest, cutest hug in the history of underdog stories. Pilo let out a slow, weary sigh, part exhaustion, part pride. In the back of his mind, a sarcastic thought popped up, great. Now I'm a legend. Does this come with snacks? Rain continued to fall, but the alley air felt different, charged, alive, like it had just witnessed something extraordinary. Mimi curled against Pilo's side again, but this time her trembling was gone. She felt safe. Because her big orange best friend had proven that even the laziest cat on earth could become a warrior when it truly mattered. Pilo sat down with as much dignity as one can have while dripping wet and emotionally traumatized. He closed his eyes for a second, breathing slowly. He saved her. He actually saved her. And she was here, safe, alive, hugging his paw like he was the greatest thing that ever happened to her. For the first time that night, a tired smile tugged at the corner of Pilo's mouth. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but it sounded more like applause this time. The battle was over. The dog had disappeared into the darkness, hopefully to rethink its life choices and maybe attend therapy. Rain still dripped from rooftops, but the alley felt a little lighter now, like it had just let out a breath it didn't know it was holding. Pilo, however, was not doing so great. He took a few shaky steps forward before his body decided, okay, that's enough hero work for today, and his chubby legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the wet ground with a heavy thud, more dramatic than intended, but honestly very cinematic. Mimi squeaked in panic, rushing to his side. She placed her tiny paws on his paw, frantically squeaking his name like a tiny alarm system powered by anxiety. Pilo's breathing was heavy. He was soaked, bruised, and scratched. One of his paws was bleeding slightly, his ear had a cut, and his eyes flickered between consciousness and, "Please let me sleep for 12 years. He managed to open one eye and glance at Mimi. He tried to give a reassuring look, but it came out more like, "If I die, tell my snacks I love them." Mimi darted around in circles, unsure what to do. She squeaked loudly toward the alley entrance, as if hoping someone, anyone, would see them. And fate, finally, decided to clock in for work. At that exact moment, a faint light appeared at the far end of the alley. Footsteps approached, slow and cautious. A human silhouette emerged, a middle-aged man in a worn-out jacket, probably the owner of the little noodle stall nearby. He had come out because he heard strange noises earlier. Maybe he expected raccoons. What he got was an orange feline war veteran lying dramatically in the rain like a fallen gladiator. The man's eyes widened. "Whoa, what happened to you, little buddy?" he muttered, crouching down. Mimi stood in front of Pilo protectively, as if warning the human not to hurt her friend. The man blinked in surprise. "Is that a mouse?" he whispered. "And they're friends?" For a brief second, it looked like a weird Disney crossover scene. The man shook his head in disbelief, then slowly reached out toward Pilo. Pilo didn't move, too tired to care if this human planned to adopt him or toss him in a salad. The man gently touched Pilo's head. "Poor thing, you're hurt." His voice was soft. "Kind." Mimi backed away a little but stayed close. He carefully scooped Pilo into his arms. Pilo let out a small groan, somewhere between pain and, "I did not consent to being lifted like a potato sack." But he didn't resist. He was just too done. Mimi followed, tiny feet splashing in puddles as she trailed right behind them. The man noticed her. Instead of shooing her away like most would, he let her follow, shaking his head in amazement. "All right, little mouse. You can come too. I guess we're all weird tonight." He took them into the back of his small home, a simple, cozy room behind the noodle stall. Warm light. Dry floor. A towel. Actual food. It felt like heaven. He laid Pilo on an old cushion and gently dried him with a towel. Mimi climbed up and curled next to him, still watching like a loyal bodyguard. The man cleaned Pilo's wounds carefully and placed a small bowl of warm broth nearby. Pilo opened his eyes a bit, dazed but relieved. He looked around as warmth began to spread back through his cold, tired body. Mimi nestled close under his chin, squeaking softly in comfort. The man smiled softly at the sight. "You're a tough guy, aren't you?" he said with a gentle chuckle, scratching Pilo behind the ear. Pilo let out a tiny purr, barely audible, which in cat language basically meant, "I accept your service, human." Mimi squeaked approvingly and happily began nibbling on a crumb the man placed for her. It was an odd little family, but somehow, in the glow of that warm room, it felt right. Pilo slowly drifted into a deep sleep, surrounded by warmth, friendship, and the absurd comfort of being rescued by someone who didn't judge him for being an oversized, wet cheese puff. And as his eyes finally closed, his last thought before sleep was something like, "If I survive this, seriously, I want a blanket, a heater, and maybe a spa day." Sunlight crept lazily through the dusty curtains like a nosy neighbor peeking into your business. The small room behind the noodle shop was quiet, warm, and smelled faintly like soup and old furniture. On a makeshift cushion near the corner, Pilo lay curled up, still a giant fluffy orange meatball, but no longer wet and miserable. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he looked around in confusion like someone waking up in a stranger's house after a dramatic night out. It took him a second to remember, the fight, the fall, the human, the towel, the bowls of warm broth. He blinked slowly. He wasn't outside anymore. He wasn't in danger. He was alive. A little sore, yes, like he'd run a marathon, which, to be fair, for him meant like 10 steps. But he was alive. Right beside his face was something small and white, Mimi, curled up against him like a tiny live plush toy. She was sleeping, holding on to his fur like she thought it might vanish if she let go. Her little whiskers twitched with each breath. Pilo stared at her for a long moment, and something strange and warm filled his chest. It wasn't heartburn this time, it was gratitude. He let out a soft purr, which startled Mimi awake. She blinked up at him with enormous eyes, then squeaked happily and hugged his paw like a toddler who just saw their favorite stuffed animal come back to life. Pilo rolled his eyes in a seriously kind of way, but his expression softened as he gently nudged her with his nose. Across the room, the noodle shop man entered with a new bowl of warm water and a plate containing bits of fish and rice. "Good morning, hero," the man chuckled. "Or should I say, Lord of the Alley?" Pilo gave a small, embarrassed huff, as if to say, let's not make this a title. But the delicious smell of fish distracted him instantly, and he suddenly sat up, ignoring the slight ache in his back like a true warrior discovering breakfast. The man placed the plate down and even added a tiny crumb piece for Mimi. She squeaked in pure joy. Pilo watched her happily nibbling next to him, and a rare, faint smile appeared across his chubby face. The kind of smile that said, "This is nice. I could get used to this." He ate slowly, savoring every bite. The warmth in his belly reminded him of how life could sometimes be good even after absolute chaos. Mimi kept glancing at him as if she was proud, which was honestly weird because she was the size of a potato chip and yet she looked at him like he was her superhero. When he was done eating, Pilo settled back down. Mimi immediately curled against him and started grooming his fur gently with her tiny paws, removing little bits of dust like a meticulous nurse. Pilo muttered a low purr, letting it happen. He felt oddly pampered. He looked at her for a long time and thought, she stayed. The whole time. She didn't run away. She didn't leave when he collapsed or when the human took him inside. She stayed by his side like a tiny guardian angel with whiskers. Pilo, with all his sarcasm and laziness, felt something heartfelt bubble inside him, which annoyed him to no end. Great, he thought. Now I have emotions. He glanced at the man across the room, who was fixing a bowl of noodles for breakfast. For just a moment, Pilo caught the human looking his way with a kind smile. That simple gesture made something inside him melt like butter on warm toast. Maybe humans weren't so bad after all, at least, not the ones who gave free fish. Pilo leaned his head back with a deep sigh and thought back to the night before. He had been terrified. He had wanted to run. But he didn't. And because of that, Mimi was still alive. That thought alone filled him with a heavy, sleepy pride. He had done something right. Something big. Mimi squeaked something that sounded like a tiny thank you. Pilo gave her a gentle boop with his nose. If he could talk, he would have said something like, "Don't mention it. Seriously, don't. I have a reputation to maintain." He slowly drifted in and out of sleep throughout the morning, every now and then opening his eyes to see Mimi still curled against him, safe and warm. Each time, he felt another wave of relief wash over him. Relief that he protected her. Relief that someone protected him. Relief that they were still together. For once, he didn't complain about anything. He didn't grumble about rain or hunger or the lack of royal treatment. Because honestly, in that moment, he had everything he needed, warmth, food, and his tiny best friend who apparently believed he could defeat dragons if needed. As he dozed off again, Mimi snuggled deeper into his fur, and Pilo thought, with a soft half-smile, if this is what being a hero feels like, I guess it's not that bad. Still exhausting. But not bad. The sound of rain had faded into a gentle silence. The room felt safe. The nightmare was over. And for the first time in a long time, Pilo felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Peace. Evening settled gently over the noodle shop, painting everything in soft oranges and pinks, like the sky was copying Pilo's fur as a tribute. The rain had long stopped, the puddles drying into faint glimmers under the streetlights. Inside the cozy little room, Pilo was now sitting upright, still bandaged, still a little sore, but definitely alive and milking the almost died energy like a celebrity recovering from a scandal. Mimi sat proudly by his side, grooming his whiskers as if preparing him for a royal portrait. The noodle shop owner, whose name, by the way, turned out to be Mr. Haru, had just placed a fresh blanket beside Pilo and even upgraded his cushion to a fluffy old pillow from the sofa. Luxury, by Ali standards. Truly 5-star. Pilo stretched out, feeling dramatically dignified, as Mimi curled into his side the way she always did. The room smelled like warm broth and good luck. Mr. Haru leaned against the door, watching them with a soft smile. "You two are something special," he said warmly. Pilo blinked up at him, not annoyed this time, almost grateful. Mimi squeaked softly. Mr. Haru sat down on the floor nearby and pulled out a small notebook. "You know, people think heroes have to be big and strong," he said, looking at Pilo. "But sometimes a hero is just a chubby cat who decides to stand up when it matters." Pilo looked away shyly like, "Okay, stop, you're embarrassing me in front of my mouse." Mimi hugged his paw. He let her. No sarcasm this time. The evening outside had grown quiet. A soft breeze came through the window. Pilo rested his head on his paws, his eyes reflecting the golden light. He felt peaceful, full-bellied, loved. He wasn't sure how long they'd stay there, maybe a few days, maybe forever. He didn't know. But he felt, for the first time, that maybe he belonged somewhere. Mimi curled up against his chest and dozed off first, as usual. Her tiny breathing was a gentle rhythm that made Pilo feel safe too. He laid one paw over her protectively, as if saying, My friend." Mr. Haru stood up to dim the lights. "Get some sleep, heroes," he whispered as he stepped out, leaving a small lamp glowing in the corner of the room. Pilo watched the door close quietly. He looked down at Mimi, then at the lamp, then at the soft blanket wrapped around him. He let out a long, deep purr, not out of hunger or frustration, but something far rarer for him, contentment. His thoughts rambled lazily as he drifted off. "I didn't want to be a hero. I didn't ask for it. But maybe heroism isn't about wanting it. Maybe it's just about showing up for the ones you care about. Even if you're scared. Even if you'd rather be napping." He fell asleep with a little lopsided smile. And there in that quiet room, beneath that warm blanket, surrounded by friendship and peace, one orange cat and his tiny mouse companion proved something the world often forgets. That courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waddles. And that even the softest heart, wrapped in fluff and laziness, can burn brighter than fear when it's lit by loyalty. Moral of the story. So if you ever feel small, or too scared, or not built for greatness, remember Pilo, a chubby orange cat who'd rather sleep than fight, yet found bravery hiding somewhere inside his round belly when someone he cared about needed him. Because real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about loving someone enough to act, even when you are terrified. And that, my friend, is the kind of bravery this world truly needs. And that's the end of the story. Pilo and Mimi are safe, warm, and together again. Even the smallest friends can bring out the biggest bravery. I hope this story makes you smile before you go to sleep. Good night, and maybe, Tomorrow, you'll dream of brave Pilo too.